Over the past few years, I have had the opportunity to participate in monthly spiritual direction sessions. These serve as an aid in working out the complicated knots my neshama so often ties itself up in. My spiritual director listens skillfully as I describe these knots to her, and almost always, she waits until I'm done and then asks, "So where is God in this?" Taking on spiritual direction has led me to think quite a lot about how God reveals God's self to us. Heschel writes in God in Search of Man that the word revelation is like an exclamation. It's an indicative rather than a descriptive term. Like all terms that express the ultimate, he says, it points to its meaning rather than fully rendering it. For Heschel, there is something about revelation that is intrinsically undefinable, something we don't quite have the capacity to put into words. The best we can do is gesture towards it. And there are many bold and obvious gestures towards divine revelation demonstrated in our Torah. They are our tools for understanding that God is with us. We know we are hearing a true word of God when we see smoke and lightning, hear blasting horns, or a booming voice disseminating from a mountaintop. However, the three parshiot which cover the story of Joseph contain none such gestures. In fact, many are moved to ask, upon reading them, the very question my spiritual director so often asks, where is God in this? Scholars across disciplines note that in the book of Genesis, while we often find God presenting or speaking or acting miraculously to save God's people, in the story of Joseph and his brothers, we never find such an appearance. No miracles, nothing out of the ordinary. I wonder, though, if instead of positing God's absent, Parashat Vayigash, our parsha for this week in the third installment of the story of Joseph, is encouraging us to engage different tools for locating God's presence. If it's modeling alternative or perhaps more subtle gestures towards divine revelation than the ones that we expect to see. Are there maybe moments in our parsha that point to complex grandeur of the divine rather than fully rendering it? The reunification of Bnei Yaakov in Parashat Vayigash is emotionally rich. The episode moves through a moment of shock and fear into one of sheer relief and hope. The brothers listen to Joseph as he explains all that has happened to him was providential. Joseph tells his brothers that he believes their sale of him into custody of another tribe was only so that he could go ahead to Egypt and create the circumstances that would take his family out of famine. He instructs his brothers to go back and gather up their father's camp so that they can relocate to Egypt and benefit together from their stockpiled resources. The brothers realize that Joseph is not going to punish them for their abusive acts they carried out towards him as children. Instead, they now understand that Joseph has been planning to nourish and protect them. Without uttering a word of response, Benjamin falls on the neck of Joseph, and the two brothers, in front of all the others, embrace and weep. It's not explicit from the plain meaning of this text where or if God is acting in this scene. However, the sheer range of heightened emotions expressed in these few verses is enough to indicate that this moment is worth excavating for God's presence. This passage reads just like an exclamation mark, like the exclamation mark that Heschel describes. Could Joseph's revelation of his own identity be a moment of divine revelation? When looked at closely, there are some striking gestural parallels between the scene from Genesis 45 and the revelation story told in Exodus when Israel stood at the base of Har Sinai to receive Torah, our paradigm for revelation. At the beginning of Genesis 45, Joseph emits a cry heard across Pharaoh's kingdom and then tells his brothers to come closer as he reveals himself, akin to the shofar blasts described in Exodus 19, verse 13, which signal to the people that God is ready to reveal God's self to them. Then there's a paradigm-shifting truth set forward in Exodus by way of covenant and in this week's Parsha by way of fraternal reconciliation. In verse 3, we read that the brothers at first are terrified, shocked by Joseph's dramatic self-disclosure. Similarly, in the revelation of Exodus, the children of Israel tremble and retreat, hearing the voice of God. It's also worth noting that the stakes in these two scenes are quite high. As the wandering Israelites at the base of the mountain, ill-equipped for nomadic life and self-governance, are given no real choice but to accept the covenant with God, the brothers of Joseph in Pharaoh's kingdom are desperate, rattled by famine and strife. Their only hope for survival is to accept Joseph's offer. The gestures here towards revelation are striking. But what are they pointing to exactly? The embrace between Joseph and Benjamin is particularly interesting to our commentators. The Chizkuni offers what we might read as the more obvious meaning of this text, saying that after 2 decades of estrangement, Joseph and Benjamin fall upon each other's necks and cry in an unrestrained outpouring of love. Rashi, however, along with actually many other commentators, relies on a midrash from Bereshit Rabbah, which promotes an entirely different reading to explain this verse. Bereshit Rabbah teaches that Joseph and Benjamin embrace, and as they do, they each have a vision of the future destruction of the holy sites in what will be their respective territories of the Promised Land. As he leans upon the neck of his brother, Benjamin sees the temple in Jerusalem fall, Jerusalem being in Benjamin's future territory, and Joseph, the tabernacle in Shiloh, which will be in Joseph's future territory. According to the Midrash, it is due to these visions, these premonitions of destruction yet to come, that the brothers then weep. This midrashic explanation of the moment may feel far-fetched. Still, its wide adoption by our commentators, including Rashi, who purports to offer the most plain meaning of our text, indicates something worth paying attention to in the brothers' embrace. In an interpersonal moment, the tradition teaches that the brothers feel simultaneously relief in their change of circumstances and grief in understanding that their good fortune might not persist. In this emotionally intense exchange, the brothers see that God's world contains both redemption and destruction, that their search for home and safety expands far beyond their particular moment and echoes through time and space, through generations and generations to come. The theologian Franz Rosenzweig says that revelation is a glimpse of the unique eternality of God. The brothers, Joseph and Benjamin, get a glimpse from a vantage point only God has, only God can offer. Bereshit Rabbah reads Joseph and Benjamin to have had a fleeting but impactful vision into God's way of being in the world, one that supersedes our mortal sense of time and place. What is that, if not divine revelation? The only time God's voice presents in Parashat Vayigash comes much later in the portion, when God speaks to our forefather Jacob. God says to Jacob, "Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayma," I will go down with you to Egypt. Jacob follows his sons down to Egypt not because Joseph is there alive and well, nor for the promise of food security for his family. Jacob only goes when God affirms God's partnership with him. This brief exchange with God gives Jacob the assurance he needs to know that God is there with him in Egypt and will continue to participate in the lives of Jacob's descendants. We learn from this parsha that divine presence will manifest differently in the foreign land and in a new generation. As the story of our people progresses, so will our relationship with God. And still, God is active and detectable to us through revelation. Ultimately, this assurance is what bolsters the family of Jacob to make a difficult move, to leave their land and protect their future. In our time, it's not always easy to detect where God is in our lives. I don't know about you, but I have yet to hear God's booming voice from a mountaintop or anywhere else for that matter. But Parashat Vayigash teaches us that God reveals God's self in a plethora of ways. And in heightened and precarious times like the ones Jacob's children faced in famine, knowing that God is with us can help us make the next best steps forwards towards safety and towards honoring life. You may say that we, like Joseph and his family, his brothers, Jacob's sons, are all living in a heightened and precarious time. In the last few years, our community has been rattled by war and disease. Acts of hatred and violence have been committed against us here and abroad, and we have carried out unthinkable acts of destruction against others. It behooves us, for the sake of our future, to not only ask, where is God in this, but to then also do the hard work of finding God, of figuring out God's modes of self-expression, no matter how explicit or implicit they might seem to us. Next Shabbat will be in the year 2026, believe it or not. As we enter a new year, I invite you to ask yourself often, where is God in this? And to use all your powers and tools for detection in pursuit of the answer. In attuning ourselves to God's many ways of being with us, may we live out the new year in safety, in joy, and in abundance. Shabbat Shalom.